Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk about automating a CI/CD pipeline. This is the first part of the SDLC domain in this course. I want to go over some of the key points of a CI/CD pipeline and build the base for this course. So I'll talk about what is a CI/CD pipeline, some of the components of a CI/CD pipeline, and the key principles of a CI/CD pipeline. Let's start with CI/CD. CI stands for continuous integration and CD stands for continuous delivery. A continuous integration is where all the developers are working on their code, pulling it together and actually building it, making sure that it's working as expected and doing that continuously so that it is a non-stop process. Every time there's a new code, we integrate it or test it and build it, and then delivery comes in. And that's actually how you continuously push the new product out to the customers. For every applications, it's going to be different, and that's all the time is that you have to understand what is the requirement. But continuous delivery remains the same. It's getting into the hands of the end users. And continuous delivery means we are wanting to do that very frequently. Now, the purpose of a CI/CD pipeline is to automate every part of the software development lifecycle, or SDLC. You might see those terms come up a lot. Software development lifecycle in short is called again SDLC. Alright, let's take a look at what is it like without a CI/CD pipeline. So before we had a CI/CD pipeline, this is a little bit of about how something would go. So we have these users and these are developers on the left side. They're going to be writing code, pulling it on the development server and testing it on the development server. They're looking to add features, fixed all the bugs, and they're going to be working off this development server. So they'll write code and put it on the development server and test it and see if their feature worked or not. Now, mind you that right now I have one developer here, but this is usually a whole team of developers working on this application and all doing this, putting it on that development server, running it and testing it and see if the feature worked. So now what happens when we needed to go into production, there will be always another person, usually on the operation side or the system side, and they're going to go in and take what's on that development server. They'll copy it, for instance, that they can package it up and then move it to our another server. Staging. Now staging is kind of like in between development and production. It is supposed to be very similar in size and configuration as production, but once we put this application into staging, we're going to be making sure that it works. That means that the system user, the one that's deploying the code, doesn't really know what the developers did on the development box. They might have had to make some tweaks and changes in the configuration of the servers to make that code work. So the system team is now going to try to find and make as many of those changes in staging as are required to make the application work. Once they have a working version, and now they're going to do that same thing again on production. They copy down, write down everything they're doing in the staging environment, and then they're going to go ahead and do that same thing again in production. So you could see that just from this explanation that I just did, there's a lot of time going into people having to do these things and to change configuration files or server configurations, all of these different things. That is like, it takes a lot of manual works to actually help this application get all the way into production. Sometimes just going from the development to production will take weeks and sometimes even months for these large applications because of these detailed requirements to make it work. Now let's take a look at what it actually looks like with a CI/CD pipeline. So now on the left we have our developers. They write the code and then put this code on the repository. Now once that code lands into the repository, what we can do is we can trigger a pipeline. So when I say a pipeline, think of this as more of an orchestrator. And so what we do in this pipeline is we're going to be doing all of those things that all the developers had to do on the development environment, everything that the systems or operations teams had to do on the staging and the production environment. We're going to have all that process in code, and it's going to go ahead and do all of those things. So as soon as they write the code, they commit the code, we put it in the development. But before we do that, we have to package it, compile it, test it, and then we're going to automatically put it in the development environment so that the developers can test and see if it works. Then once that has done, now the pipeline will be able to promote all of the changes that it did automatically onto the staging server now instead of the development server. Now once that staging is signed off and it has an approval from the team, you will be able to move that new code through applying the same changes onto the production environment. Now you see, we only have the developer in that who is the only user in this scenario, because the pipeline is taking care of all that aspects that go into changing configurations or making packages, compiling all the stuffs that is going to be done automatically, and it's going to put it right into the right environment. This is how a pipeline helps us. This is what we want to do. We want to automate flow of code all the way through all of the environments. Alright, so now let's take a look at what are the components of a CI/CD pipeline. The first one is a version control repository. Remember, I said the developer is going to put their code into the repository. So this is usually a version control repository like Git. So every time there's a new code change, that is actually not just saved over the file, but it's actually going to save a revision of that file. So what you could say, or you could do, is say, how is the last commit compared to the previous one, or how does this change, current change, is compared to a month ago, and how is the code changed over the time, and what lines were changed. All of this stuff you can actually tell the differences between every time something has changed in that version control repository. The next aspect here is going to be the pipeline. Think of the pipeline as the orchestrator. All it really is doing is it's making everything work together. So we have the repository triggering the pipeline. Now the pipeline has the code, and then the pipeline is going to trigger all the various things that needs to run. So the state of this code going to production, and it is going to be controlled and managed through this pipeline. The next thing we're going to need is a build server. The build server is what we are going to use to do some of the compiling, packaging, maybe even testing, and a lot of other things around that. A lot of the things, like I said, we used to have to manually change on each server, like development server, production, and staging. So instead of that, let's do those changes on a build server, and that's kind of what its purpose, to make any changes needs to be done. So it's going to be compiling and packaging everything up. Now the last component is a deployer. This might be a deployment service, it might be a deployment server, it might be a deployment tool or a script. However it is, there's something going to be doing in the deployment of the application. So that is going to be a key component of a CI/CD pipeline. Now let's check out some of the key principles of a CI/CD pipeline. The first one is automation. This is probably the most important principle in CI/CD. We want everything, literally everything, to be automated. The next thing is that we want everything to be as code. So you might have heard this term like infrastructure as code. We want everything, literally everything, to be on code. The application is code. We want the build instructions to be on code. We want how to test it is to be in code. How we want to deliver it in the servers, that needs to be in code. We want end-to-end in code. And we honestly even put the pipeline itself in code. So that way we know everything when anything has changed. And this is the beauty of automation pipeline, right? You know exactly what are the things has been changed, and you know where it being changed. The next pipeline is testing. Now, the only way to be confident that a pipeline works successfully is when it is tested thoroughly. So we want to be able to make tests throughout the pipeline to make sure that we don't introduce anything that will harm the production deployment. So we want to implement test as frequently as we can to verify that the application is in a good state for the deployment. The next one is going to be the consistency. So what we want is we want to be able to see is consistency in how we build, how we compile, how we package, and most importantly, how we deploy the service. So we want to be sure that the staging is very consistent with how the production is set up, so that when we go to staging, we know what to expect, and when we go to production. Now the last principle is frequently integration. So this is another important aspect in order to make a CI/CD work. That is what we want. We want to continually integrate when we have a lot of code changes, and we're talking about months of work that we're going to be able to all of a sudden putting together. That's going to be a potentially a very hard change to make, because that's a lot of changes, right? Over the course of a month, that now we have to make sure that all of that code changes doesn't break anything in the previous version. Whereas if you are integrating frequently, there might be 5 lines of code that change, and that's a lot safer change, because you know what those 5 lines are in the code and what they are doing actually. But over a month you write a lot of code, right? You might think thousands of lines of code, and now finding out what exactly caused some issue becomes that much harder, because you have to find it in all of those lines of code that you just wrote in the past month, right? So integrating frequently is very important and actually will help you speed up the life cycle of your software development life cycle, because what we're actually able to go to production quicker and we're able to make more releases. That's what we want, right? Micro releases. And these are the principles I wanted to talk about, which are, I think, apply strongly in a CI/CD pipeline. And in upcoming videos, I'm going to go through a lot of in more detail throughout this course. And this way to lay that foundation for what is upcoming, right? So I hope you enjoyed it and see you in the next session.